Hi, I'm Mike Ahern, co-author of Selling Today, Partnering to Create Customer Value. I'm here with Neil Rackham, best-selling author and leading sales educator. Neil, thanks for joining us today.
Hello, Mike.
Hi, Neil. I'd like to start off by asking you a little bit about what got you into selling. What motivated you to start studying the area of selling?
Yeah, sure. It was entirely by accident. I was a quite respectable researcher, and the work I was doing was trying to measure the way people interact with each other. Yeah? And just looking at the kinds of behaviors people use. And I was using this to look at helping relationships, like therapists, patients, or teachers and students. And one day someone said to me, "Why don't you study selling?" And I said, "Eh, you selling? Why would I do that? I'm respectable." And they said, "Well, here's the interesting thing. In the average sales force, the top 10% of people sell 3 times as much as the bottom 10%. Nobody knows why." I thought, "Now, that is an interesting question." I thought, I've got some methods that could help answer that. And so I started then looking at selling, and I haven't stopped since.
All right. Tell me a little bit, Neil, when you started working on teamwork, and you noticed that, selling became very important and selling in the field itself has become important. Tell me why selling has been a passion for you over time.
Well, I've come to realize that selling isn't about persuasion. You, why would I worry whether somebody persuades someone to take 20% more of their widgets? That didn't seem a really interesting set of issues. But the more I thought about it, the more selling becomes the thing that makes business work. Because there's a simple way of thinking about it. It's what happens in between companies that releases the value,
Right.
that creates the economy. Not just what happens inside companies. Nowadays, most companies are pretty efficient, moderately well run, they're productive, but the way companies work together isn't anything like so. And the job of sales is to enable a company to work with other companies who are their customers in the best and most efficient and most valuable way. And looking at that way, it's a real contribution to the economy.
So can you tell us a little bit about what your original research uncovered and what were some of your big aha findings that got you into working on books like Spin Selling?
Okay. Yeah, originally we just set out looking at selling to see, are the people who are succeeding doing anything that's different? And the first thing we discovered was pretty simple, and that is, in the successful sales calls, it's the customer who does most of the talking, not the salesperson. We also found salespeople who went in there and tried to push and get across the products, they would succeed in low-level selling, where you could make the sale in just a single call, or where the value of the product was fairly low. And they could succeed by enthusiasm. They could rather aggressive type of selling, and that would work. But the moment you got into high-level selling that took many calls, the rules changed. And until that time, no one had ever thought of a difference. The old theory was selling is selling. In fact, there was some research done in the 1950s that said the first 30 seconds of a sales call determines your success more than anything else. Now, it so happens that research was done on students selling magazine subscriptions. So if you knock on a door, if you don't have a good pitch within 30 seconds, the door closes.
Right.
But IBM was teaching its mainframe computer salespeople who were selling multi-million dollar pieces of equipment that the first 30 seconds was the most important thing, because at the time that was the only action research. And of course, as we know, it's not. It's not really important at all. And yet, you can only teach the things that you know. And as we began to develop more sophisticated models of selling, we realized it was entirely different things. Questioning skills, in particular, came out as being hugely important. And successful people have a pattern of questioning. They ask the kinds of questions which clearly gain some initial understanding. But what they're doing is that they are seeing themselves as people who solve problems for customers. And if you don't ask about the problems, you can't solve them. So they asked a lot of questions, but the really good ones, the top people, had very different strategy. I might ask you, if I'm an ordinary salesperson and not that good, I'd say, Mike, do you have a problem with this? And you'd say, yes. I say, let me tell you how our product can solve it for you. So I jump in with answers. We found that the top salespeople didn't give their answers, didn't give their solutions until very, very late. And what they were doing was they were taking the problem and they were going into more depth. They were looking at the simplification. So they'd be more like I said, does that problem mean it's slowing down your other functions? Is that upsetting your customers?
Right.
What effect is it? And then when we looked at the top salespeople, they asked another type of question too. Questions about value. Questions about why is that important? How would that help you? Because the mistake people make themselves is if the customer says, your product's great, they say, thanks, I'm glad you think so. The really good people say, what's so great about it? Tell me what you like. Tell me how it would help you. Because they get the customer talking in the customer's own words about how helpful a solution would be. Things like this came out of the research.
So that's really what, as you were talking about this implication, that's really where the sort of the heart of spin comes from, right? So
Yes.
the implication part of spin. So when you were thinking through the spin, situation, problem, implication, need, payoff, what made you think to yourself, well, let's come up with that acronym and let's think about this I in spin.
Well, the interesting thing is the S, E, and I are the same in almost all languages. In French, situation, problem, application, same German. So in most languages, situation, problem, implication are well understood. The difficulty was you have the SPI. What should the acronym be? Think of the questions and the last type of questions being questions about value. So the obvious acronym is SPIV. But you will tell from my accent that I'm a Brit. And in colloquial Brit, SPIV is a guy who comes to you in the street and says, you want to buy a stolen book? And so it was too down market. So we called it spin. And we did this in the days before spin meant what it usually does now. But it's not a great acronym. It's not a great name, but it's stuck and it's widely used.
Well, it's very memorable. I mean, and I would say that it's one of probably the most memorable selling techniques that's out there. You talk to any salesperson, it's had a tremendous impact on people.
Certainly, something like 6 million people bought over the years. And one time, maybe even more than half of the Fortune 500 trained their people.
Right.
So it's a very, very well-known method. But the reason why it's been successful, I think, are two things. Number one is based on research. Not many people had done any research in this area. This came along. And the other is, it's about the bigger and more complex sale. And here's the important thing. Smaller sales, simple sales are going away. More and more, they're going to internet. They're being run, controlled by marketing, not by sales. So the sales job of the future will be about the larger, more complex, more sophisticated sale. And that's what this spin model was designed to work on.
Let me ask you about that a little. I mean, you're going in a direction I think that would be really valuable for the students to learn about, which is you're out there working with companies all the time. But what are the biggest trends that you see right now in selling and the markets? How are they evolving right now?
Perhaps the biggest single trend is this. In almost every field, there's competitors everywhere. More competitors than ever before. Some people estimate that in the last 5 years, in the average marketplace, there are twice as many competitors as 5 years ago. So most companies have competitors. And most products do the job perfectly well. So what's happened is the difference is no longer product. And for example, you buy a car 20 years ago, And the difference in the number of defects on delivery between the best and the worst was more than 50 to 1. Today, it's much less than 2 to 1. In every field, products have got more reliable, the quality is better, the price is very similar. And so, how's the customer going to choose today? Well, one of the big trends is more and more customers say, it's not the product. I could go to any of 3 vendors. What I care about is how it's sold. Does the person who sells it help me solve my problem better than their competitors? So how you sell is becoming more important. What you sell. Now, what this does mean is there's a tremendous demand today for competent salespeople. They're in short supply globally. It's really time to be going into sales.
Let me ask you as a follow-on to that, with this intense competition in the marketplace, and obviously the internet and social media playing such a big role. If we look back about 20 years ago, everybody was talking about this concept of disintermediation. That is, companies using the internet to sell directly to customers and completely getting rid of intermediary salespeople. That they were talking about the sales job vanishing completely. And so if that had been realized today, we wouldn't have any salespeople. How has the internet actually played out with salespeople, and how has it changed their job?
What the internet has done has changed 2 huge respects. One being that is a convenient way of purchasing for people who know the solution, who know the answer. If I know what I want, I might be buying, say, a digital recorder. Well, okay, the easiest thing to do is go on the internet and see who has the best price, never have to talk to a salesperson. So a lot of standard products gone to the internet, and the internet has taken that market away. And it's the area which is customized, more complex, more sophisticated, that needs a salesperson to make it happen. The other thing that the internet has done is it's given customers information. It doesn't matter if your product has 100 competitors. If the customer only knows of one other competitor, you only have one other competitor. Today, customers know about every single competitor. They know about you and mistakes they've made. They can do their research. And what's that meant for selling is if you are what I call a talking brochure, if you're someone who says, Mike, let me tell you what a good product we have. Customers don't want that. They don't need that. They even resent. The number one customer complaint about salespeople is they can't pitch product. So if they're not doing that, what should they do? And the answer is they should help me solve.
So part of what you're saying really goes back to the whole spin concept, which is really this bringing value to the customer. And so one of the things you're indicating, and I'd like you to speak on this a little bit more, is this concept that salespeople now bring value not necessarily by communicating basic information about products and services, but solving problems. Can you articulate on that a little bit to let us know what that trend looks like?
Sure. Philip Kotler, the great marketing guru, who maybe more than anyone invented modern marketing, his original great marketing textbook, he wrote, the purpose of marketing is to create customer value. And the purpose of selling is to communicate that value to the customer. But in those days, selling was a communication channel. Where else could the customer find about your product, what it could do and what it couldn't do? In those days, they had to see a salesperson. And the job of the salesperson was to communicate that the product had some outstanding and useful things. Well, today that's no longer true for 2 reasons. One reason is products are more similar, so other competitors' products could do it too. So your product doesn't have something special to communicate. The other thing is that the idea of communication has been made totally redundant by alternatives like the internet. So under those circumstances, Philip Kotler would be the first person to say that's no longer true today. So the function of selling has shifted from being communicating value, communicating products and services to the customer, to becoming creating special value. And the simple way of putting it was maybe 20 years ago, if you were selling mousetraps, you'd be saying, let me tell you why our mousetrap is better than theirs. You'd be communicating the value of your mousetrap. But now there's 100 different ways of killing mice. There's blue traps, mouse traps, ultrasonic traps, green traps, blue traps. There's every type of trap you could imagine. So how do you sell it? Well, you don't communicate the value of your mousetrap. What you do is you say things to the customer like, best time to put a mousetrap down is about 8 o'clock at night. Always use gloves because mice will otherwise smell you. This is the best kind of cheese to use in baking. What's the salesperson doing there? The salesperson is creating value by being an expert on how the product is used. And that's value creation. And that's the future.
It's interesting you talk particularly about this creation of value and the solution of problems. Do you have any recommendations in particular for these students as they develop their careers in selling on how they can do the best job of creating value? Are there any particular strategies that the top salespeople use?
I think the number one strategy is focus on the customer because you create value by helping the customer and solving their problem, not persuading them that they should buy your product. So the first issue there is the deeper you understand the customer, the more value you can create. Because a product or a service is only a tool to help customers solve problems, to improve their efficiency or whatever. And you can only help them with that by understanding them and their business. This is why there's been a swing away from sort of sales training and some of the techniques that you might use to sell your products towards sales education, which says the salesperson of the future has to understand business. See, if I were teaching sales to students today, I would say selling has to be part of a real business sophisticated education.